Official titles are just marketing. The real verdict of history is the nickname, the name that sticks when the statues crumble. We're not talking about the greats today. We're digging up the impotent, the sluggard, and pineapple face. These aren't just cheap shots. They're the brutally honest stories of how absolute power gets weird, goes wrong, and becomes utterly absurd. 1. Kicking things off, we have Charles VI of France, whose legacy is forever cemented by the nickname the Mad. And when we say mad, we're not talking about a quirky monarch who talks to his plants. We're talking about a man who suffered from terrifying psychotic episodes, the most bizarre of which was the unshakable belief that his entire body was made of glass. This wasn't a passing thought, it was his reality. He forbade anyone from touching him, fearing the slightest bump would cause him to shatter into a million royal fragments. He even had iron rods sewn into his clothing to provide structural support for his fragile glass frame, turning his royal garments into a sort of wearable cage. Just imagine the sheer, crippling anxiety of the French court. Every day was a high-stakes game of royal Jenga, where one clumsy servant could theoretically break the king and, with him, the entire political stability of France. 2. While some rulers are victims of unfortunate nicknames, others, like the infamous Ugandan dictator Idi Amin, were their own hype men, crafting titles so absurd they sound like fiction. His self-proclaimed official title wasn't just a name, it was an epic poem of ego. Please allow me to present His Excellency President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire. Let's break that down. He didn't just want to rule Uganda. He felt the need to formally declare his lordship over every squirrel and tuna on the planet. And the conqueror of the British Empire part? A complete fabrication, of course, but it was a masterful act of trolling an entire superpower. This title perfectly captures the mind of a man whose megalomania was so profound, it created its own gravitational pull. 3. History can be a harsh critic, but it was particularly savage to King Henry IV of Castile, who was branded for all time with the devastatingly direct nickname, the Impotent. In the 15th century, a king's ability to produce an heir wasn't just a personal matter. It was seen as a divine endorsement of his right to rule. A fertile king meant a fertile kingdom and God's favor. So, Henry's inability to conceive a child was viewed as a national catastrophe and a sign of heavenly disapproval. The situation escalated into a full-blown civil war, fueled by rampant rumors that his only daughter, Juana, was not his, but the product of an affair between the queen and a court nobleman. His personal crisis in the royal bedchamber literally tore his kingdom in two, proving that in the high-stakes world of medieval monarchy, performance anxiety could have geopolitical consequences. 4. When you hear Viking King, you expect a name that sounds like a death metal band, like Eric Bloodaxe. What you don't expect is Magnus III of Norway, who is known to history as Magnus Barefoot. He didn't earn this title through some act of rugged defiance like walking on ice. No, Magnus was essentially a victim of fashion. After a military campaign in Scotland and Ireland, he became completely infatuated with Gaelic style. He traded in his practical, rugged Norse trousers for the breezy comfort of a kilt. To complete the look, he and his men often went barefoot. When they sailed back to Norway, this band of hardened warriors looked less like conquerors and more like they had just returned from a very strange gap year. The nickname wasn't a testament to his toughness, but a permanent reminder of his controversial and, to his people, utterly bizarre fashion choices. 5. Sometimes, the most powerful political weapon isn't an army, but a simple, devastating caricature. This was a lesson learned the hard way by Louis-Philippe I of France, forever ridiculed as the Pear King. A brilliant satirist of the era, Charles Philippe I, observed that the king's head, with its fleshy jowls, puffy cheeks, and narrow cranium, bore an uncanny resemblance to a pear. The image was so perfect, so immediately understandable, that it became the 19th century equivalent of a viral meme. Soon, the pear was the universal symbol of a regime considered soft, bloated, and fundamentally stupid. The government's frantic attempts to censor drawings of the fruit only amplified the joke. They were literally waging a war on a piece of produce and losing badly, proving that once the public decides your head looks like a pear, your reign is essentially over. 6. In the vicious Game of Thrones that was the Byzantine Empire, being deposed wasn't enough. Your rivals had to ensure you could never come back. For Emperor Justinian II, this meant a horrific mutilation. They sliced off his nose, a common practice designed to render a man ineligible to rule again. He was exiled and given the grim name Rhinomitos, the Slit-Nosed. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed he would accept his fate. Instead, in an act of pure, unadulterated defiance, Justinian commissioned a prosthetic nose forged from solid gold. It was less a medical device and more a glittering statement of intent. He then rallied an army and marched on Constantinople, his golden face shining as a terrifying symbol of his unbreakable will. It remains the most audacious and stylish comeback in political history. 7. In an era of pious kings and holy wars, let's raise a glass to Leszek I of Poland, a man who truly had his priorities straight. When the Pope issued a call to arms for a new crusade to liberate the Holy Land, a cause of immense spiritual significance, Leszek sent a letter of profound and honest regret. He explained that, after careful consideration and research, he and his knights would have to decline the invitation. The reason? There was no beer in the Holy Land. He laid it out for the Pope. His Polish warriors were simply not accustomed to drinking wine and could not be expected to perform at their peak without their beloved ale. It's a legendary moment of pragmatic leadership, a ruler who understood that a thirsty, unhappy army is a useless army, even if the cause is holy. 8. Few nicknames are as visually specific and psychologically cutting as the one given to the Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, cara de piña, or pineapple face. His face was heavily scarred by acne, creating a pockmarked texture that his opponents immediately and gleefully compared to the rind of a pineapple. The insult was devastatingly effective because it dismantled the very foundation of his power: fear. A dictator's authority is built on an aura of untouchable, terrifying mystique. But it is fundamentally impossible to be terrified of a man when your brain is screaming "pineapple" every time you see him. The nickname was a simple, juvenile, and brilliant act of psychological warfare that punctured the balloon of his authority, turning a feared tyrant into an international punchline. 9. Next, we venture into the world of Vikings, where nicknames were earned through glorious deeds or fearsome reputations. And then there's Ivar, known as the Boneless. What kind of Viking gets a name like that? The truth is, nobody knows for sure, and the mystery is what makes it so legendary. One theory suggests he suffered from a condition like brittle bone disease, making him a military genius who commanded battles from a shield carried by his men, a terrifying, untouchable strategist. Another more badass theory claims the name referred to his incredible, almost supernatural flexibility in combat, moving like a snake on the battlefield. It paints a picture of a warrior so fluid and unpredictable, he seemed to have no bones at all. It's a nickname straight out of a dark fantasy novel, transforming a historical figure into a mythological entity whose very nature remains a chilling, debated puzzle. 10. If you think modern politics is a web of intrigue, allow me to introduce you to the Grand Master of the game, King Louis XI of France, who earned the perfectly fitting title, the Universal Spider. This wasn't a man who believed in grand armies or heroic charges. Louis saw his kingdom not as a map, but as a colossal spider's web, with himself perched silently at its very center. Every political marriage, every secret treaty, every whispered rumor was a silken thread he had personally spun. He would patiently wait, feeling the slightest vibration, a courtier's betrayal, a rival's ambition, and then act with swift, quiet precision. His enemies rarely saw him coming. They would just find themselves hopelessly entangled in his plots, realizing too late that the spider had been watching them all along. It's a chillingly effective metaphor for a king who played chess while everyone else was playing with swords. 11. Meet Augustus II, King of Poland, a man whose nickname, the Strong, barely does justice to his legendary exploits. We're talking about a ruler with literal, cartoonish, superhuman strength. As a party trick, he would allegedly take a solid iron horseshoe and snap it in half with his bare hands, just to see the stunned faces of his guests. But his legendary stamina wasn't confined to feats of strength. He applied the same vigor to his personal life. Historians estimate that he fathered over 300 illegitimate children, a number so staggering it seems less like a monarch and more like a one-man population boom. Augustus the Strong wasn't just a title. It was a complete lifestyle. He was building a kingdom by day and single-handedly populating it by night. It's a legacy of raw power in every conceivable sense of the word. 12. Here's a story about how a king's financial desperation can be permanently etched onto his face, or at least onto his coins. In his later years, the once mighty Henry VIII of England was old, obese, and broke. To fund his lavish lifestyle and endless wars, he resorted to a classic scam, debasing the currency. He ordered the mint to produce coins made of cheap copper, but with a thin, deceptive wash of silver on top. As these coins circulated, the silver would inevitably wear away. The first place it would rub off was the highest point of the relief on the coin's surface, which was, of course, the king's prominent nose. Soon, the country was filled with coins featuring a king with a glowing, reddish-brown nose, earning him the pathetic and mocking nickname, Old Copper Nose. It was a daily, pocket-sized reminder that the king's majesty was just a thin veneer over a cheap and decaying core. 13. Sometimes, a political smear campaign is so petty and so effective it lasts for 1,000 years. Case in point, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine V, who was saddled with the truly foul nickname Copernimus, which literally translates to the dung-named. According to his many political and religious enemies, as an infant during his own baptism, he had an unfortunate accident and defecated in the holy baptismal font. Whether this actually happened is irrelevant. His opponents seized on this one alleged baby mishap and never, ever let it go. Throughout his entire reign, despite being a skilled military commander and a competent administrator, he was relentlessly mocked with this disgusting name. It's the ultimate proof that in politics, the mud that gets slung first, even if it's from the nursery, is the mud that sticks. 14. History has a wicked sense of humor, and nowhere is that more obvious than with Pepin the Short, King of the Franks. Pepin was a hugely important and formidable ruler. He deposed the last king of a failing dynasty, founded a new one, and laid the groundwork for one of the most powerful empires in European history. But history, in its infinite cruelty, decided that his most memorable feature was his height. The ultimate cosmic irony? His son and successor was none other than Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, a man famous for being exceptionally tall. Pepin did all the hard work, fought all the tough battles, and established a dynasty only to be remembered as the short dad of his really, really tall son. He is the eternal opening act for the main event, a powerful king forever living in his son's very long shadow. 15. Inheriting a vast and powerful empire from a legendary father is a tough act to follow. For Selim II, son of Suleiman the Magnificent, it was apparently too much work, so he chose a different path and earned himself the straightforward nickname, the drunkard. While his father was out conquering half the world, Selim's greatest conquests were in the royal wine cellar. He was so famous for his love of the drink that rumors and legends swirled around his reign, most of which ended with him being in a drunken stupor. The most famous story is of his death. Allegedly, while chasing a servant in the bathhouse after a heavy drinking session, he slipped on the wet marble floor and suffered a fatal head injury. It's a death so tragically unglorious, so perfectly ignominious, it serves as the perfect, sloppy endnote to the life of a sultan who preferred the bottle to the battlefield. 16. Some historical nicknames are perfectly descriptive. Others are just a giant, tantalizing question mark. Enter Wilfred, the 9th century founder of Catalonia, who is known to history as Wilfred the Hairy. That's it. No explanation, no context, just hairy. This complete lack of information is what makes it so brilliant. Was he a man who simply sported a magnificent flowing beard and a chest like a shag carpet? Or was the hairiness in other, less publicly displayed locations? Perhaps he was the first man to suffer from a unibrow so epic it was deemed worthy of a historical title. The ambiguity allows the imagination to run wild. He was a foundational figure for an entire region, a count of immense importance. Yet his defining physical characteristic, the one thing everyone remembered, was his mysterious and all-encompassing hairiness. 17. Few nicknames managed to be both a compliment and a savage insult at the same time. But King James I of England and Scotland received a masterpiece of the genre, the wisest fool in Christendom. This wasn't just a random insult, it was a stunningly accurate psychological profile. James was a highly educated, deeply intellectual man. He could debate theology with the best of them, wrote scholarly books on topics ranging from witchcraft to the divine right of kings, and had a genuine, powerful intellect. However, when it came to practical decision-making, common sense, and dealing with actual human beings, he was an absolute disaster. He was the living embodiment of someone with maximum intelligence but zero wisdom. The nickname brilliantly captured this paradox. A man who could tell you the precise Latin term for a political blunder while actively committing one. 18. Here's a story of how a minor dental issue in the 10th century ended up naming the wireless technology in your pocket right now. Harold Bluetooth. Gormson was a Viking king who did something remarkable. He united the warring tribes of Denmark and Norway into a single kingdom. The nickname Bluetooth likely came from a dead or decaying tooth that had a dark, bluish-black appearance. It was a memorable, if slightly gross, physical feature. Fast forward 1,000 years to 1997, when engineers at Intel were developing a new technology to unite different communication protocols. They needed a temporary code name. One of the engineers, a history buff, suggested Bluetooth as a nod to the ancient king who united disparate factions. The temporary name stuck, and now a Danish king with a bad tooth is immortalized every time you connect your headphones to your phone. 19. Imagine trying to conduct sensitive international diplomacy with a man who might start foaming at the mouth at any moment. That was the reality of dealing with King Alfonso IX of Leon, a man who earned the incredibly vivid and unflattering nickname, the Slobberer. According to historical chronicles, Alfonso had a notoriously short temper, and when he flew into a rage, he would literally start drooling with fury. This wasn't just a quiet trickle. It was apparently a noticeable and unsettling display. The nickname paints a picture of a ruler whose emotional state was so volatile, you could physically see it bubbling over. It's one of the most visceral and least regal images in all of royal history, a permanent reminder that even a powerful king could be reduced to a sputtering, slobbering mess when things didn't go his way. 20. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters have the cutest names. The Roman Emperor Gaius was known to the world by his childhood nickname, Caligula, which translates to Little Boot. He got the name as a toddler when he accompanied his father, a famous general, on military campaigns. The soldiers were charmed by the sight of the tiny boy toddling around in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with little military boots, or caligae. It was an adorable, endearing nickname that stuck with him for life. This creates one of history's most jarring contrasts. The name Little Boot conjures up an image of innocence, while the man himself became a legendary symbol of tyranny, depravity, and madness. It's a chilling reminder that even the person who would later declare his horse a consul once started out as someone's cute little kid. 21. A nickname can be a weapon of terror, especially when it's designed to sound benevolent. François Duvalier, the brutal dictator of Haiti, understood this perfectly. He cultivated the public persona of Papa Doc, a name that leveraged his past as a rural doctor to create an image of a caring, fatherly figure who was there to heal the nation. But this was a sinister piece of branding. Papa Doc wasn't just a doctor. He was also a practitioner of voodoo, which he expertly used to build a terrifying cult of personality. He convinced the populace that he possessed supernatural powers, and that his secret police, the dreaded Tonton Macoute, were not just men, but otherworldly demons who could see into their souls. The name Papa Doc was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, calm, reassuring, and utterly terrifying all at once. 22. Often, a ruler's nickname comes from a great battle or a political masterstroke. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus got his from a fashion choice. He became obsessed with a particular type of Gallic hooded cloak called the caricalla. He wore it constantly and even made it the mandatory uniform for his personal guard, turning it into the must-have fashion item in Rome. The name stuck so firmly that today, almost no one remembers his actual name. We just know him as Caracalla. Imagine if a modern world leader became so associated with a piece of clothing that history forgot their real name and just called them President Hoodie or Prime Minister Sweatpants. It's a strange legacy for a man who was, by all accounts, a ruthless and bloodthirsty tyrant. But his fashion sense is what history chose to remember. 23. Of all the things a US president could be remembered for, creating the most ubiquitous word in the English language is probably the weirdest. Martin Van Buren, the 8th president, was from Kinderhook, New York. His supporters affectionately called him Old Kinderhook. During his 1840 re-election campaign, his followers formed OK clubs all across the country. The abbreviation OK became their rallying cry, a shorthand way of saying that their candidate, Old Kinderhook, was all correct or good to go. While Van Buren lost the election, the term OK exploded into American culture and then the world. So, every time you casually say, OK, you are unknowingly paying tribute to a largely forgotten 19th century politician. It is arguably the most successful and enduring political slogan of all time. 24. In the rugged mountains of Persia, the leader of the infamous Order of Assassins cultivated a persona so mysterious and powerful that it terrified empires. His name was Hassani Saba, but he was known to the world only by his enigmatic title, the Old Man of the Mountain. This wasn't just a nickname. It was a carefully constructed brand of fear and mystique. It conjured an image not of a mere man, but of an ancient, almost supernatural being who dwelled in an impregnable fortress, commanding an army of disciples with absolute, fanatical loyalty. Crusaders and kings who had never seen his face spoke his title in hushed, fearful tones. It transformed a guerrilla leader into a mythological figure, a shadowy puppet master pulling strings from his mountain lair, making him far more terrifying than any king on a throne. 25. A person's nickname often depends on who you ask, and for King Bolesław II of Poland, the answer varied wildly. To his friends, allies, and the soldiers who benefited from his lavish spending, he was Bolesław the Generous. He was known for rewarding loyalty with heaps of gold and land, a king who knew how to keep his supporters happy and well-fed. However, to his enemies and those who found themselves on the wrong side of his fiery temper, he was known by a very different title, Bolesław the Cruel. This dual identity perfectly captures the reality of medieval power. Generosity to your friends often required cruelty to your enemies. His nicknames weren't contradictory. They were two sides of the same blood-soaked coin, a perfect reflection of a ruler who was either your greatest ally or your worst nightmare, with absolutely no middle ground. 26. Some rulers are remembered for their great victories, others for their grand monuments. And then there's Louis V, the last Carolingian king of France, who is remembered for doing absolutely nothing at all. He earned the profoundly unimpressive nickname Louis the Sluggard, or Le Fainéant in French. His reign lasted for just over a year, and in that time he managed to achieve a spectacular record of 0 accomplishments. He didn't win a war, he didn't pass a law, he didn't build a castle. He mostly just bickered with his mother and the clergy before dying in a hunting accident. He was less of a king and more of a historical placeholder, a final, sputtering ember of a once great dynasty. His nickname is a brutal, but frankly, accurate summary of a man who held the throne of France for a year and left no mark whatsoever. 27. If Louis XI was the universal spider, then Sigismund of Luxembourg, Holy Roman Emperor, was his fiery-haired counterpart, known across Europe as the Red Fox. The nickname was a direct reference to his magnificent red beard, but it was also a perfect descriptor of his political style. Sigismund was a master of cunning, diplomacy, and outright trickery. He navigated the treacherous and complex politics of the Holy Roman Empire not through brute force, but through sharp intellect and a talent for outmaneuvering his rivals. He was charming when he needed to be, ruthless when the situation demanded it, and always 10 steps ahead. The Red Fox was a name born of both respect and fear, a warning to anyone who dared to underestimate the shrewd, red-bearded emperor who played the Game of Thrones with unparalleled skill. 28. In an age dominated by warrior kings and ruthless conquerors, Wenceslaus II of Bohemia stood out for a very different reason. He was known as the Poet King, a title that sounds more like a character from a fantasy novel than a medieval European monarch. And it was true. While his contemporaries were busy sharpening their swords, Wenceslaus was sharpening his wits and his quill. He was a patron of the arts and a talented poet in his own right, particularly in the German Minnesang tradition of courtly love poetry. His court became a cultural hub, a sanctuary of art and literature in a violent world. While his political and military achievements were respectable, it was his passion for poetry that defined his legacy, leaving behind a reputation as a ruler who preferred crafting a perfect verse to waging a bloody war. 29. Sometimes a person's entire destiny can be sealed in a single, mundane moment. That was the case for Henry I of Germany, who became known as Henry the Fowler. Fowling is an old term for hunting birds, usually with nets or falcons. According to the popular legend, when the delegation of German nobles arrived to inform Henry that he had been elected king, they found him not in a grand hall or on a training field, but out in the meadows, completely absorbed in fixing his bird-catching nets. The image was so memorable and so charmingly rustic that it stuck with him for his entire reign and beyond. He turned out to be a brilliant and effective ruler who laid the foundation for the medieval German state, but he was forever immortalized by that one simple, earthy moment when destiny called, and he was busy with his hobby. 30. Political smear campaigns are as old as politics itself, and in medieval Sweden, they could be particularly vicious. King Magnus IV found this out when his political enemies gifted him with the nickname smäck, a Swedish word that translates roughly to caress or kiss. This wasn't a compliment. It was a carefully crafted piece of propaganda meant to undermine his authority. The name was a not-so-subtle insinuation that Magnus was effeminate and, more scandalously, that he was having a homosexual affair with a young male favorite at court. These rumors, spread by his rivals, were designed to paint him as a weak and unnatural ruler in a fiercely masculine era. Whether true or not, the nickname was a potent political weapon, a whisper campaign that has echoed through history for centuries. 31. Sometimes a nickname is born not out of malice, but out of pure linguistic laziness. Such was the case for Wilfred ap Llywelyn, a powerful 11th century Welsh ruler who managed to unite all of Wales under his command, a monumental achievement. However, his name, Gruffydd, was notoriously difficult for his English-speaking rivals to pronounce. So they just gave up. In Old English, a common term for a dog was ci, pronounced key. The English apparently thought Gruffydd sounded a bit like that, so they started referring to this mighty Welsh king as, essentially, the dog. It was a dismissive, almost insulting simplification of a powerful adversary, a classic case of renaming something you can't be bothered to understand, turning a national hero into a simple canine in the annals of their history. 32. Finally, we have a name so famous, most people don't even realize it's a title, not a name. The man born as Temujin would one day be known to the world as Genghis Khan. This wasn't a name his parents gave him. It was a title bestowed upon him when he united the Mongol tribes, meaning universal ruler, or oceanic ruler. It is perhaps the most ambitious and successful rebranding in all of history. It's a statement of absolute world-spanning authority. He wasn't just a king of a tribe, he was the ruler of everything, as vast and unstoppable as the ocean itself. The name change was a declaration of his ultimate goal, a piece of psychological warfare that announced to the world that a new terrifying force had arrived, and it was aiming for total domination. 33. We conclude our journey with a nickname that encapsulates the dizzying heights of ambition and the sheer, raw power of a self-made identity. The legendary founder of the Mongol Empire was born with the name Temujin, a relatively common name for the time. But the name that would echo through eternity, striking fear and awe into the hearts of millions, was the one he took for himself: Genghis Khan. This was not a name, it was a declaration. A title meaning universal ruler or oceanic ruler. It was a statement of intent so grand, so audacious, it bordered on blasphemy. In a world of regional kings and petty lords, he was claiming dominion over everything, as boundless and untamable as the great ocean itself. By shedding the name Temujin, he shed his mortal, tribal identity and became a force of nature. It's arguably the most powerful and successful rebranding in human history. A name that didn't just describe a man, but defined an entire era of world-altering conquest. These nicknames are the scars on the face of history, the truths that power could never erase. But our list ends here. The historical burn book, however, does not. We know there are more out there, waiting to be exposed. So, what's the one unforgivable omission? The one nickname so perfectly brutal it should have been on this list from the start? Expose it in the comments. If you believe history is better told this way, hit like and subscribe.